to the Colorado Rock Art Association monthly webinar. I'm Teresa Whedon. I'm the current president of the chapter. Our speaker tonight is Margaret Berrier, who lives in Las Cruces, New Mexico. And she is close to quite a few cool rock art sites. But she used to, I believe she used to live in the Houston area. So I can understand her leaving because we left Houston to come up here to Colorado. She has quite the biography here. And if you got the email, which I'm assuming you did, you can go ahead and read most of it yourselves and see. She's done a lot of recording, and been to a lot of cool sites. And I know one of our friends, Margaret Berrier, is giving a talk for Aurora next month on Western Egyptian desert rock art. They did a 10-day journey into the desert several years ago, and that should be interesting. Margaret's going to talk about, let's look at fish. Pisciforms in the Mimbres and Jornada Mogollon region of southern New Mexico, northern Mexico, and West Texas. So Margaret, go ahead and have at it.
All right, good evening. Zoom is a new kind of thing that we're all getting used to, and for me it's a challenge because I'm used to talking to real people. So hopefully it'll still work out okay for you. I moved to Las Cruces about 14 years ago, and I picked this area because of because the really spectacular rock art. I always like to start out my presentation by acknowledging the First Nation people who created these images and whose land we reside on. I think that's an important thing for us all to acknowledge. I have worked on some projects where I saw fish, and I had been thinking for a long time that I should start a collection of fish imagery. And then in May, when I wasn't going anywhere, I saw a really very interesting presentation by Dr. Pat Gilman, and she was talking about Mimbres pottery and I was kind of fascinated because she did a lot of talking about fish. And I asked her, I said, well, has anybody ever done any comparison of the rock art and the fish imagery in the Mimbres pottery? And she said, no, but that sounds like a good project for you. So I kind of took it away. As some of you may know, others may not, that there is actually a Mimbres database online that if you have an interest, a research design, you can get a login and see all of the Mimbres images that have been photographed. And this includes ones that are not only found in books, but in private collections. There are also plenty of books out there with wonderful pictures. So if you are studying fish and looking at Mimbres pottery, it's fairly easy to find that information. There are some challenges with using this Mimbres database because there are images in there that are from looted sites. The database asks you not to publish these. You can talk about them, but because they have been looted, showing pictures of them tends to increase their value. So that's one of the challenges. The other thing is that most of you know, many Mimbres pots were used in burials. So it's important to do, if you're using these, to do so in a respectful way. I'm not actually using any images, no photographs of these Mimbres pottery, but I have redrawn all of them so that you can see what's on them when I start to discuss them later. So my idea was to create my own little mini version of that database using rock art. So my area of study here is the Jornada Mogollon, which, let me see if I can turn on my little pointer. So this is the Jornada Mogollon. Most of the things that I found were within that. This is the a boundary that was drawn in 1948 and still pretty much holds to the style that archaeologists call the Jornada Mogollon. As probably most of you know, the word style is kind of loaded. I don't think these people were all joined exactly, but they had a shared cosmology, and they were small groups that frequently interacted. Polly Shaftsma and Aaron Wright have extended that area a bit and further west. So basically, I used both forms of both approaches to rock art. The informed one, where I look a bit at the ethnography, but most of what I do is formal, where I'm recording the distribution and the imagery. And I do look at patterns and things like that, but my main purpose is to provide this information for those that have more knowledge of ethnography and who get to work with First Nation people to help interpret or understand, but also this work helps us to protect the rock art. So in the first thing I did was, I'm using the word Pisciforms here because some of the images don't completely look like fish. And some of you will go, well, that's not a fish. But I mainly looked for the attributes of the fish, including dorsal fins, the tail fins, the gill opening. Those are the things that I looked at. I include these things that some people consider fish. It certainly could, the people could have meant this to be a fish, but it's pretty hard to judge. There's no hard and fast rule here. I'm also not saying that these were necessarily meant to be to represent or be symbolic of fish, but they look like fish. And so when we talk about things, we have to kind of give them a label. And so I'm calling them fish. So one of the things that also needs to be done is when describing these, we have to look at the context and compared. One researcher describes this figure as having a fish hat. And what I tend to like to do is to look at this in context. Here is a similar figure on the Mimbres pottery, and this is at Three Rivers. This figure at Three Rivers also has a line, but it doesn't appear to be a fish. I think this is pretty interpretive to call this a fish hat. But if you want it to be a fish, then it can look like a fish hat. Another thing that I think is really important, and I do in all my presentations now, is talk about the new dating that has been done. Originally, when Polly Shaftsma worked in this area, she thought the Jornada was from 1000 AD to 1400 AD. But new dating has been done by Miles Miller of some, actually these are artifacts from dry caves, both in the Mimbres area and in close to Waco Tanks. And the date range is run from 500 to 1450. So you can see this puts those images that we're looking at as much earlier. And that's important because it can change. As you know, when we date things earlier, it makes all of the other things that we base those dates on get shuffled out. Oh, by the way, the dates on here was not on the paint, so there can't be an old wood problem. But it was actually on, these were made of sotol and yucca fibers, plant parts. So, and not the paint. This corresponds with the dating that was done at Waco Tanks. And so it has the same date range. So this is the time period that essentially I'm looking at, 500 to 1200 AD. So most of the time, most of my work is what I like to call boots on the ground. It's much easier to judge a lot of things and to understand things if you've actually seen them, as opposed to looking at them in pictures on the internet. So I spend a lot of time, this is Three Rivers. And thank you, Barbara, for the picture. So I do a lot of data gathering. This is the formal approach. I looked when I started to compile this group of fish petroglyphs. I looked through all of my archives collections. I consulted other sources. I asked my friends if I'd missed any. And then I mapped the distribution of all the fish images that I saw. And so this is what I came up with, the fish that I found in my collections close to the area that I described. Some of them go a little out, but as you can see, most of them are within that range. One of the things in my areas, I'm really lucky because there's a whole lot of BLM land, and so I'm able to see that. One of the things that does happen, though, is it's hard to record or know what is in areas that are off limits to us. And as you can see, this is southern New Mexico. You'll see here the military reservation. All of this in pink is off limits to me unless I have somebody who can report it to me. The Apache reservation is, that's a blank space. Much of West Texas is private property, and Mexico is also a bit of a mystery. Also, the Mimbres area does have lots of rock art, but it's not nearly as well documented as the rest of the Jornada Mogollon. So there's undoubtedly more out there than I found. And hopefully at some point I'll be able to learn more about the rest of the area. So one of the things I'm not going to do is talk about fish from other areas. These are all fish from up north. There aren't really many as far as I have determined. I asked Polly Shasma, and she could only remember 3 or 4. Some of them are, maybe dubious fish too. One of the reasons I'm doing this is because if we talked about all the fish all over, you'd get really bored. So I'm going to stick to the region that I know best. What I do is I created a catalog, and I did this by printing the pictures, and I put them on a light table, and I traced them. And what I do is I use my light table in front of my computer so I can zoom in and out on the images to get the detail. Then I take the drawings out and do a field check to make sure that I haven't seen something that's not there in the picture. Any of you that have ever done this will realize that sometimes you get shadows or lines that show up that are cracks. So it's very important to field check these. So this is the catalog. This is a bit of the catalog of some of the images that I've traced. There are over 100. Of that 103, and now I think it is only 9% of them were pictographs. That's not surprisingly. Generally, the other images that I have documented, about 10%, 10 to 12% seem to be pictographs. And I don't think that's necessarily that what was originally done, but the ones that are remaining are a very small percentage. One of the reasons I got started on this is the two pictures on the bottom are in the San Andreas Mountains, which is on White Sands Missile Range. And I helped arrange for a possible recording of this, and then COVID happened. So I was really excited. These are very interesting. This is a very interesting area. I hope that we get to study soon. So some of the questions that this compendium that I'm collecting could answer is if those people who study them, if they can determine if the petroglyph images are, whether they're native or exotic species, what relationship there is with the landscape, and then of course comparing them with the Mimbres, and possible interpretation by those that are qualified to do that. The Old Pueblo Archaeology Center is going to at some point publish this online, including all of the tracing. So I'm excited about that, because that means that people, what often happens, as you probably know, is that people have books and they publish 3 or 4 pictures from an area, and it doesn't give you a clear picture. And so that's why I'm really excited about all of the images getting out there, because then other people in other areas can also look at them. As far as possibilities, I looked at the oral histories. I think there are, I don't believe that there was one motivation for creating these things. I think they mark the landscape and the petroglyphs. How that relates to, and an interesting question I thought of recently is that these Mimbres ceramics also must have been part of a different kind of landscape, maybe possibly more internal. But it's one of those things that when you work on a project, you get a lot of questions. Are they literal? This is one of the things people probably don't realize, is that at one point in the Rio Grande, we had these huge long-nosed gars, and there are many of them in the rock art of this region, with the long snout and the ferocious teeth. This is a picture that my friend Bill Souls took of his wife. I haven't actually seen this image. He was kind enough to share it with me. You can see it's very, very large. This is, it's in the Las Uvas area. Bill is a major hiker, and he goes all over the place, and he finds some interesting, this is isolated. It's all by itself. I think it's important also to look at the place in the landscape. I mean, we are in the middle of the desert. People are like, well, where's the river? Why were they making fish there? And I think that's why Three Rivers is quite amazing. There were rivers there, and the most fish were found at Three Rivers. This image is, this is my friend Leroy, and if you can't tell, it's very hard to photograph this image because it is on a slope and it's very faint, and the rock was bad, so it's almost 9 feet long. Now the question is, was that meant to be a real fish? Here we have one on a Mimbres pot. Is this an exaggeration, or were there really that big of fish? At Three Rivers, the records for Three Rivers was recorded between 1988 and 1992, I believe. The records there show that there were 75 fish. when looking at my records and along with the help of a couple of friends, we could only relocate 41 of them. So there may be more out there, or somebody might have labeled something a fish that I didn't recognize. But since there are 22,000 images there, it's not surprising that I missed some, despite the fact that I've been there 11 billion times. So some of the fish look more metaphoric or mythical. This interesting creature, if you can, is a long nose like a gar, but then he has a cloud terrace design here on his body. He has X's on his tail. So I imagine that there's some symbolic. I'm not suggesting I know what that is, but that it isn't meant to be a literally a fish. So let's now look at some of the Mimbres fish. These are the different eras of the Mimbres. Most of the exceptional designs that we see that people are always so fascinated by were done in this age range of 950 to 1100. So this means those images that were painted on the pots of fish are most likely were done later than the Jornada. That's important. One of the things, the dating that was done earlier, they assumed that the images looked like that because they looked at like the Mimbres pottery, and we could date the Mimbres pottery, that they had to be done at the same time. The Mimbres database has about 340 items that have fish imagery. That's approximate. They've categorized all the images in there, and there may be some that didn't get correctly categorized. It's a work in progress, but it's really nice to be able to look at that. I did visual comparisons of images that I've seen. This some people have interpreted as a catfish with the feelers that they have on the top of their head. So here's the image that I traced. There are quite a number of these horned fish in the Mimbres pottery, but one of the challenges were that all of the ones that I could find were sites that had no provenience. So they were probably looted. So because there has also been a lot of fakes made, it's very hard to tell if you don't have provenience whether they are real or not. One of the nice things about rock art is most of the time it stays where it was created. So I also looked at some of the themes that are in rock art. We have combinations of this lovely bird from Three Rivers and the little fish up here. And this is a drawing from Three Rivers also, where the bird is pecking the fish. There are numerous examples of fish and bird in the Mimbres pots. This just happens to be one of them. So you can see there's really a lot of similarities between the iconography of the two areas. Polyshaftsma said that they were not prehistoric naturalists, but they were creating these images for roles in ideologic structures. So, and this one is also from Three Rivers. It has a fish tail, but the front of it looks like something else. There are also a lot of composite animals, both in the Mimbres pottery and in rock art. So this one is very hard to see. It's there again, it's on a sloping bedrock surface. And so the tracing really helps bring out details. He's the same creature with the horn and the fishtail. There's also some thematic comparisons that I've done. in the Mimbres database, there are several figures that have that are being swallowed or by fish. Here's an example from Galaz, and at Three Rivers, the man is in the fish. There is another example of a man and a fish in the Gila National Forest, but it is very faint, and so it's really hard to get a photograph of. I saw it once, I haven't seen it since then. So I hesitate to show the picture because I'm not sure exactly, I need to do a field check before I do that. Another compare that I've done is thematic ones. This is a drawing of a image from the St. Thomas lava flow that is not very far from Las Cruces. Here's a goggle-eyed figure, and I use the term goggle-eyed here. I know a lot of you may be used to the term Tlaloc, but if you think about the age range that I talk about, Tlaloc was much later. So if this is indeed a Mesoamerican image, it would not have been called by an Aztec name. So I just call them goggle eyes to remain neutral. That doesn't mean he's wearing goggles, it's just what I call it. So yeah, it's a fish. These are two examples from Mimbres pots that also are have the fish. What I thought was really interesting when I saw this one, you see this a triangular form with triangles on top. And you see the same thing in this image also. So shared iconography. This is the image of a drawing of the effigy figure of a goggle eye that was dated. This is in the later date range, but you can see the resemblance. So now, when we can certainly compare with some of these species, but a lot of people think that the ones on the Mimbres pottery were exotic species. But the question is, were they really exotic species? I know a couple of people have asked me about this, or were they artistic expressions? And I use that word artistic. You can see I've got the air quotes there because I don't think they're necessarily art, but I didn't know exactly how else to say this. Sometimes my Western words are not adequate to describe a thought pattern that I did not grow up with. Brody thought that there was much more than representation being shown, and he thought that the Mimbres were using ambiguities and visual puns and not really meaning to be literal. There's also, I looked at the correlations between these goggle eyes and fish, and there were a number of them. This little guy here is from Samalayuca, which is down south. And there's a little fish image here. I have to thank a friend on Facebook for sending this image so that I could trace it. And here's another where there's a fish. So one of the questions might be, is there an association between the goggle eye, the images and the fish? They're both supposedly water related, so that it's an interesting thing that we might look at. Here's another image where this fish here is shown above this goggle eye. Here's an example from Mimbres pottery. And this one is the furthest west that I have found a fish, down here in southern, almost to the border. So I looked a little bit at oral histories. I didn't do an in-depth study because that wasn't my focus, but there are a lot of oral histories of Pueblo people that are related to fish. Not like when you look up mountain lions or bears or some of the other images, fish aren't mentioned as often, but they were part of the emergent stories. They were part of floods. There are some twins stories that are related to fish, migration stories, ancestor figures, and connections to the underworld with fish. So these are all things that have been interpreted with Mimbres pottery. And this is kind of one of the reasons that I started looking at these ideas after I heard Pat talk. So this is a beautiful Mimbres pot from Sports, which has what appears to be some kind of mobile, but because of the unusual depiction, it has been suggested that this was some kind of ceremony. And what really surprised me is when I started looking at the fish, I found quite a number of what I call things on a stick. These were fish that were on sticks. Now, is that a spear? It's certainly possible, but since we have this, the mobile, then it's possible. What's interesting is that they also found just such a mobile in a drive cave in western New Mexico that had a fish and a bird. Some sources suggest that the fish had 4 feet because they were related to humans. That doesn't show up on the rock art fish near, but most of the Mimbres fish have 4 feet. Now, the idea of the one very prevalent theory that is going around is that the twinned fish on Mimbres pottery were the hero twins from the Popol Vuh. So that was one of the things I was looking at. How many, is there any support for that in the rock art? I did not find, I only found one place where there were even 2 fish together. That's up from the northern part. What I suggested is that if you think about it, a Mimbres pot is round or close to round. When an artist is making a creation, one of the things that they often do, not all the time, but often do, is they're trying to create a symmetry. And so if they paint one big fish in the middle, it's not nearly as pleasing to look at as 2 fish, one on each side mirroring each other. But then the people who talk about these being the hero twins say, well, the 2 images were different. Well, I think what happens is that as well as symmetry, to create a little interest, we have the fish look slightly different. So I think it may be the media that's involved. It's much harder to do this this sort of detail on a rock as it is on a Mimbres pot. Now, maybe some of you out there who are make pottery may disagree with me, and I would love to hear everyone's opinions. One of the other things, if these paired fish are the hero twins, how come we have so many other paired images? This is just one of hundreds of examples of paired other animals. These happen to be antelope. So it's another one of those questions that I think we need to think about before we make interpretations about the Mimbres. There are lots of pots that have multiple images from this one has 3, this is 4, this one has 6. How does that fit in with the idea that they were the hero twins when there are numerous fish? Now, they could still be interpreted that way, but it was one of the questions that I had. Also, one idea is that they could have been representing food. It's certainly possible. It could be a ceremony, it could be food. It could have been meant to be both, but here we have these fellows with their fish. Are they fishing, or does this have a ceremony? And I thought this is just a great example of the variety of Mimbres pots. These figures are picking bugs off of plants. So they would actually eat these. So here they are collecting food in a very similar fashion as they do here. One other thing that I did a little bit is I looked at some of the Kiva paintings and their comparison with Mimbres bowls. This isn't something I looked into a lot, but there are definitely the Kiva paintings have fish. You recognize this guy's probably a long-nosed guard. But then they also, some of them also had figures like this Mimbres bowl that had fish hats. So at Waco Tanks, there are a couple of images that have been suggested that these were the hero twins with the two fish. This one has what appears to some people to be two fish in the mouth. These two have the fish on the side. What I also found really interesting, and I stumbled on this by accident, is there was actually a kachina that was called Fish in the Mouth. You can see he has a fish in his mouth. This could even possibly have been a depiction of an early kachina. Now that's a wild guess, but I just think that by having a collection of these images, both in Mimbres and in rock art, we have more information to do interpretations with. I also looked at comparisons of these images in the different areas. Here are the fish. I also have studied bighorn headdresses and the distribution of those. Horned and plumed serpents and this is in my area. And then these are the goggle eyes. So you can see there are these are the shared imagery, and I think it's important to also to correlate those images together along with the landscape. I think it's very important to look at the landscape, but also, and in any talk, you can't cover everything. There's so much that we need to look at together, including recently, I was talking with one of my friends about it's important to also look at the plants and see how all of these things relate together. There are some interesting sites nearby. This one is Bowling Green, which is up the Rio Grande. And this panel actually has 6 fish on it, which is very unusual. Like I said, I only found one other where they had 2 together, but this is, and it's very close to the Rio Grande, but it's kind of outside my area. And so I hope at some point, this is a picture by my friend Caitlin Bird, and there appears to be a fish here on the head of this possible kachina, and then there is a fish over here. They were hoping to get this, my article published in December, but with the pandemic, there's been a lot going on, so it hasn't been published yet. It is on academia if you're interested. There also, I looked a little bit at other artifacts. There are quite a number of Casas Grande images with fish on them, these fish effigies. There were shellfish from the El Paso region. One researcher suggested that the fish on the Mimbres pottery came from the hohokam fish. But in my research, I found there were about 6 sherds from the hohokam with fish, and they didn't look anything like the fish in the Mimbres. So I suggest that they probably are more likely to have got the ideas from somewhere else or independent. Near the Mimbres area, this is a fish, and this site looks down on the Mimbres, and this one very much reminds me of an image from El Paso Polychrome, which I've shown here as a drawing. So my very general conclusions is that Three Rivers has the most diversity of fish forms. the rock art images are simpler than the Mimbres ceramics, but they do share, seem to share a cosmology. The distribution of the fish is very similar to what we consider primary elements in the Jornada Mogollon. And I would say that looking at these, the mythologies, I don't like that word, but the oral histories apply in many regions. And so that they have a shared cosmology over a long range of areas. So these are kind of the next steps for me and other people, hopefully, that we can look at some of those old theories, especially considering the new dates, do more systematic surveying of all kinds of imagery and the landscape and the plants. I hope to encourage other people in other areas to look at their pisciforms and see if we can find possibilities for dating, safe dating of other pictographs, and consulting with First Nation representatives. I have a whole lot of people that helped me tell this fish story. I like to think of this as one of my friends talking about the one that got away. And I never can do this all on my own. It's very important. I have lots of friends that have helped me over the years, and that's what makes it fun. Okay. So are there questions out there?
Okay, if you have any questions for Margaret, go ahead and unmute yourself. And then when you come on, please identify yourself. I see a thumbs up from Peter Ferris.
Margaret, this is Janet. I put a question or a comment in the chat
Okay.
box directed to you. Can you find that?
Okay, I don't see it, so she must have sent it directly to you.
Oh. I cannot see it. It won't let me see it. Oh, here it is. Twin fish seem more design oriented. Yeah, and it's one of those things it's just an idea that I had, that there's a difference, and it's a lot more complicated than we think. I'm not a big fan of interpreting things without looking at the other possibilities. And there again, that the idea that there are two fish being twins, and then there are two antelope that aren't, the hero twins. That just seemed to me that something that didn't quite fit there. And
No,
I thought about
it. Your observations were right on.
Yeah.
Right on.
Yeah. It's one of it was one of the biggest challenges I had when discussing this with some other Mimbres folks that didn't have a background in art, which I think is sometimes helpful and sometimes not. But it's one of the things that I thought about. They also thought it would be really easy to put 4 little feet on all of the fish when they were like, well, why didn't they put feet on their fish? Well, it's much harder to peck a surface than to paint a surface. And I sure had fun drawing these, I'll tell you. It was
Could you share with people the family connection? What Douglas is he still into fish?
He is. My son is a marine biologist. And which is kind of fun. And I was talking to my grandson tonight. I said, I'm going to be on Facebook on Zoom. And I said, guess what I'm going to talk about? And he goes, petroglyphs, and so he knows that. But my son has his own zoo, which is the 3 grandchildren, but they just put together their first saltwater tank. So it's really exciting. And it's kind of an interesting shared interest we have. We're all into critters and nature, which I think many rock art people who are interested in archaeology. They love to go out in the outdoors. That's a big piece of it. So.
Okay, we have just a comment from Bella. Says,
Oh,
great presentation, Margaret. Thanks for another great fish story.
okay. Hi, Bella. Bella was one of the people that helped me. I'm hoping to not necessarily see all of the images in the Gila National Forest area, but it's kind of a blank slate. It hasn't been as well recorded. And if you're going to talk about Mimbres pottery, you would think that you would also want to talk about the Mimbres rock art, but it's just not as well documented. Part of it is because it's a very rugged area. There's, I think there's, also concern about sharing site information, which I totally understand because of the looting problem that has gone on.
Anybody else have any questions? Almost knocked my bottle of water in my lap.
Okay.
We don't want to do that. Okay, Joel, do you want to tell us about next month's webinar?
Oh, Steve Waller has his hand out.
Yeah, he's clapping.
Oh, okay.
That's clapping.
All right.
Applause.
Okay. All
Applauding.
righty. Thanks, Steve.
Okay, Joel?
Yes, next month, on Wednesday, March 24th, Larry Lohendorf is going to speak on images of warfare in the Jornada region of New Mexico and Texas.
Well, that should be interesting.
He always does a great job.
He does. And I believe in April, we've got Tim Roberts from Texas Parks and Wildlife talking about Waco tanks.
And that will be Thursday, April 29th.
Right.
Okay, great.
All right.
Well, I want to thank you personally because it was very interesting since it was something that I thought would be interesting, and I'm kind of fascinated by it. I have to go back to the Pony Hills and find that fish because I didn't see it when we were there, but we had flown down for 2 conferences, one in Alpine and one in El Paso, and we didn't have our boots with us. So when our friends took us out there, it was kind of rough walking just in regular athletic shoes.
Yep. For sure.
Margaret,
Okay.
I have a question.
Yeah.
I'm looking over your left shoulder. There's a framed piece. Yeah. Behind you. Is that the interior of a Mimbres pot or bowl?
No, it is not.
It's
It's a friend. It's called. It's actually an archaeologic piece. Now, I guess you would say it's a friendship circle. My grandmother and grandfather homesteaded in Clayton, New Mexico. Then they moved back to Kansas, or I would be. I could have been a New Mexican earlier, but they moved back to Kansas. And what it had is a spoked wheel. And all the friends would embroider their name on the spoked wheel. So each woman would make them and they'd embroider their names and they gave them to each other. And they took that back as a memento of their time in New Mexico. And so
That's interesting.
That's great.
it is. It's a very interesting piece. It's hard to get it framed though.
And my grandparents moved around a lot, so they didn't keep a lot of stuff.
Yeah.
Okay, anybody else? I want to thank everybody for coming tonight. We had a very good turnout, and we'll see you guys next month. All right, good
Righty.
night.
Thanks.